Welcome to the week number 9 overview for managerial economics here at Rutgers University in Camden. And then this week we're going over 2 chapters, one of which is chapter 11, oligopoly and monopolistic competition. First off, be aware of a cartel, what the definition of a cartel is, and in particular that they try to collude, i.e. cooperate with one another. And if they're successful, basically what they do is produce the monopoly output and collectively earn a monopoly level of profits. So make sure you realize that. Also, realize that individual firms have an incentive to cheat on the cartel agreement. So this is an issue that cartels must face. So for them to maintain this monopoly pricing policy, they have to be able to detect and prevent cheating. So make sure you realize that implication. And also realize that the cartel must supply a significant portion of the output so that the non-cartel firms are relatively insignificant in the marketplace. Make sure you have a good notion of what a Cournot oligopoly is, in particular that the firms act independently of one another, and that when this occurs, that firm profits lie between the competitive and monopoly levels. So make sure you have a notion of, when we talk about a Cournot oligopoly, where price and output fall relative to perfectly competitive and monopoly levels. All right, realize that in a Cournot model, each firm sets its output at the same time. Also have a good notion of what the Nash-Cournot equilibrium is, and that is where each firm produces its best response. They are producing at their best response to what their major competitor produces that would maximize their profits. So basically in the Cournot oligopoly, realize that the Nash-Cournot equilibrium, you're taking a look at, I'm going to set my output in best response to what my rival's output is going to be. So I'm going to maximize my profits conditional on what my rival level of output is. And also understand the distinction for a Bertrand oligopoly. Also realize that if the product is homogeneous and firm set prices, that the Nash-Bertrand equilibrium equals marginal cost and therefore is lower than the Nash-Cournot equilibrium. So make sure you understand the distinction between Cournot and Bertrand oligopolies, particularly when it comes to pricing and output, and also with respect to if the firms produce a homogeneous product and they're setting prices. Realize that in Bertrand, if products are differentiated, the Nash-Bertrand equilibrium is above marginal cost. And realize that the relationship between this markup over marginal cost relates to how differentiated the products are. The more differentiated, the greater the markup of price over marginal cost. We then take a look at monopolistic competition. Realize that in monopolistic competition, the freedom of entry drives profits to zero for most firms. And I've also realized that if firms have identical costs and they produce the same goods, all firms will earn zero profits. So make sure you understand the implications of those assumptions. Even with free entry, remember that firms in monopolistic competition face a downward sloping demand curve. Thus, they can charge a price higher than marginal cost. So realize that even with that entry provision and allowing entry, they still face a downward sloping demand curve, which still gives them discretion over pricing, which will allow them in some instances to charge a price over marginal cost. And realize that why they still face a downward sloping demand curve is the fact that firms are producing a differentiated product. From there, we go on to Chapter 12, which is Game Theory and Business Strategy. First off, we go over, or the textbook goes over, oligopoly games. And just realize what number one game theory is. It's a set of tools for analyzing and understanding the interaction of individuals. So in this instance, we're talking about firms. Realize that this is important using game theory for oligopoly because there's a small number of firms that are competing against one another. So game theory is quite useful in this environment. Realize the different types of games out there. Understand the difference between a static game and a dynamic game. And also understand what a Nash equilibrium is, what constitutes a Nash equilibrium. And then also understand what the different types of Nash equilibrium are. Make sure you understand what a dominant strategy is. That's a strategy that is best no matter what your rival does. Realize what a dominant strategy solution is. That's when two players both have dominant strategies. And that is the solution that occurs at the intersection of both dominant strategies. Also, realize games can be without dominant strategies, but they can have a Nash equilibrium. And also, they can also have multiple Nash equilibriums. So in games without dominant strategies, realize that implication, that you can still have a Nash equilibrium, and it is also possible to have multiple Nash equilibrium. Also realizing games with no pure strategy Nash equilibrium and with multiple pure strategy equilibrium, there may be a mixed strategy equilibrium where players randomize over two or more pure strategies. So realize that information about the different types of Nash equilibria. The chapter also reviews information and rationality. Realize that what's the impact of information. In some games, players have complete information. Sometimes they have incomplete information. So realize how this impacts their strategies. Realize that participants in games may sometimes lack important information, and in particular might be uninformed about their rivals' payoffs or strategies. So realize that and how that impacts the strategies people employ. Also, players that have imperfect powers of calculation might therefore be unable to calculate optimal strategies and are said to have bounded rationality. Make sure you understand what bounded rationality is and the impact it has on the decision-making process. The chapter then goes over bargaining. Realize that this is an important activity that occurs in business. Bargaining, for example, in my business, when I am negotiating a contract for my services, for consulting services, you have to negotiate terms, how to approach that, what's an hourly rate, how much, when you're going to be available, etc. It's an important component of business. So realize that people are going to negotiate the price of a particular product, and it's an important component in the managerial process. Realize that at the end of that particular chapter, they go over the Nash bargaining solution. This is where the parties maximize the net surplus in the bargaining process. So make sure you're familiar with the Nash bargaining solution, in particular how to calculate what the Nash bargaining solution is. And finally, we have auctions. Realize that there's incomplete information. If you do not know what your rivals who are bidding, what value they place on a particular item. So when you go into bid, you're making assumptions about what the other bidders value they place on a particular product. Realize also that your strategy or your best strategy varies depending upon the type of auction that you are involved with. And also be aware of this notion of the winner's curse, i.e. that in a competition where you're bidding against other individuals, you may actually pay too much. So you've actually won the product, but in essence, you've lost because you've actually paid more than the product is actually worth.